to his bride on the wedding night said, "I wilt." And I think that you're saturated with lots and lots of lovely ideas and that sort of stuff, and here am I to give a boring old talk about what ISCAST might be. And yet I think it's very important for us to try and, for those of you who are new particularly, to try and capture just what it is about ISCAST that we would like to see develop. My first reflection is to look at this conference. One of the great excitements I've seen here is the freedom with which we're able to talk among ourselves. Now, one of the wonderful things is that when it's as short as this, we don't have times for differences to emerge, but at the same time, and therefore to stylise those people, oh, well, he's a heretic, he's an Arminian, he's a Calvinist, and all that sort of stuff. But what we have found is that this freedom to express our ideas and to explore what we do and to integrate our faith with our daily practice, which of course is what it's all about. I really have enjoyed the vision and energy with which a lot of us have presented things, and this has been fabulous, and we'll have a chance to reflect on that a bit further on Sunday afternoon. But when I see the energy and the vision and the drive and that sort of thing that's going on, and I say, how can we harness this, then it's a bit like herding cats. I don't know whether you've ever tried herding cats, but trying to get ISCAST as this energetic, lively organisation to sort of try and move it into some sort of direction is actually very difficult. One of the things I want to emphasise is what I call the sciences. There's not just one science, and no, it's not that, I mean, what it is, of course, is there are two sciences, physics and stamp collecting, as Ernest Rutherford said. And as a clinician, as a physician looking after patients, I'm a proud stamp collector. I stamp collect syndromes, I stamp collect the classification of drugs, and of course the greatest stamp collecting that occurred was Mendeleev when he woke up, having had his dream. He dreamt of the periodic table, and that led to the structure of the atom. So stamp collecting is not an indifferent discipline. And in biology, obviously, Charles Darwin, by classifying from from simple to complex, that led to the theory of evolution. And of course, his great colleague, Alfred Russel Wallace, discovered the Wallace line on the basis of his stamp collecting. And we'll go into that in more detail later. And then, of course, there are the miserable sciences, like economics, which, yes, it is a science, as is the more complex sciences like meteorology, what else is there? All those sort of things. And when I hear people talking about the order of the universe, and I, as an addiction physician, see the chaos and the disorder in my patients, I hardly think that, you know, if the one thing you can't do about your patients is to predict, they're not predictable at all, and they don't follow any laws. In fact, it's much more difficult. One of the greatest problems I have is if I have a patient who's an engineer. Trying to get an engineer to understand biology, well, that really is quite something. And on one very celebrated occasion, I had this guy, I could still picture him, he's red-haired. I was trying to work out, has he got alcohol-related brain injury or not? And I said to him in the end, after an hour's discussion, I said, why don't you blast it? I didn't use the word blasted, but that's for ISCAST consumption. Why don't you blasted engineers get in touch with your feelings? To which he replied, well, I'm about as interested in feelings as art students are interested in engineering. Which told me three things. One, he's not got alcohol-related brain injury, because that's a very astute comment. Secondly, I had to respect his personality and to see that this was the issue. But the third problem was that in his journey to self-understanding, which is something I'll talk about tomorrow morning, we're not going to get very far, because if you want to use Chris Mulheron's Huffpat terminology, his plausibility structure just wasn't there, was it? And if he's anaesthetising his feelings with alcohol and then claiming he doesn't have any feelings, he's got a lot of work to do. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that there are many different sciences, and Karl Barth pointed out also that your methodology is affected by the subject you study. So if you're studying something as complicated as the environment, then you're not going to use physics-type pursuits in order to do so. And I think we need to have a lot more discussion about the differences in the sciences and all that sort of stuff. The other thing I want to say at this point in relation to this is that as soon as we move outside of our science, we become lay. We're no longer experts, we're lay people. And we need to know how to educate our fellow scientists in other areas in this area. I was very taken by Natasha's presentation yesterday from CPX about how do we make ourselves as accessible to the wider community. Well, how do we make ourselves accessible to each other? That, I think, is one of the really big issues. The other thing I want to observe is something that I have all the way along. Anybody who feels that they belong to ISCAST tends to say, boy, I don't know what I'm doing in such an organisation. Everybody else seems so awesome. Except Richard points out the president, who doesn't say that sort of thing. But I do really, deep down, I sort of do think I'm in awe of all of you, and we're all in awe of each other. But guys, sometimes the humility can be a bit too much, and I think what we've got to also do is to show some boldness and some initiative. So how do we capture this energy and surf it forward between COSAC? That is the dilemma that faces those who are organising ISCAST from here on, and that's what I want to try and sort of explore a little bit here today. Now, you've seen the vision, mission and core values of ISCAST. I want to run through them again, just to sort of to flesh them out a bit so that you can understand what our culture is, because I think that's so important. How did that get? I'm going the wrong way. Okay, yeah, sometimes one goes the wrong way and needs correction, doesn't one? The vision is that we host a dynamic dialogue in the in between science and religion, although this is going to misbehave itself, okay? And to develop and advocate a Christian perspective on that dialogue in these communities. Our core values, the first thing to say, and people often ask, is ISCAST evangelical? And I think, of course, one of the things that people are nervous of is how to be a cultural evangelical, or are we really an evangelical that is? Now, as far as I'm concerned, the way I would understand our evangelical commitment is that we are committed, that an evangelical is a gospel person. They are committed to the gospel. And the gospel is as expressed in the basic creeds of the Christian Church, particularly the Nicene Creed, which tells the facts of who Jesus is and what he has done. And insofar as I am committed to that particular basis of faith, this then becomes a touchstone around which I would welcome anybody who also confesses that same faith in Jesus Christ as Lord and in the gospel that the creeds represent. Secondly, I think we have a strong scientific commitment, and we don't make any apologies about that at all. We don't devalue science, and if you like, of the two books, we do think that the book of nature is an important book to understand. We also feel that we're morally accountable. We are committed to understand and work within the limits of our knowledge, and we seek to minimise the adverse impacts of the applications of our sciences and our technology. And I'm very grateful that we have people who are in ISCAST, and the TER being the technologists, who are also such an important part of what we do. And I think James's distinction between scientists and engineers was a very good one, and I'd encourage that. As far as biblical interpretation, we do respect scriptures, and I think one of the most important things to say in relation to six-day creationism and that sort of stuff is, what's it doing there, is to say that we are in the mainstream evangelical position. We are not liberals in interpreting the Bible at all. I was asked once, do you have a good book on the first 3 chapters of Genesis? And I suddenly thought, my confident reply can be, read any respectable evangelical commentary, or even commentaries from other traditions who take the Bible seriously, and that would be the position that we take. The very literal interpretation of the books of the early chapters of Genesis is not mainstream interpretation. And yet at the same time, if we have members who are struggling in this area, one of the things that we want to have is what's called a theological safe space. That is, we want to be free to ask these questions of each other, and then also to challenge each other. And then we're free to ask and to challenge, that people are allowed to explore difficult questions. And I do recall a theologian who was a graduate of a college north of the Murray River, which shall remain nameless, who went on an excursion with us, and we were just freely bantering around, looking at forests and seeing how that could possibly be a science. And we were asking questions of each other, and he said, I wouldn't have been allowed to ask those questions. And we said, what? Because the very nature of scientific inquiry is to continue to ask questions and to be free to ask them, going back to my very first point. But we seek to speak the truth in love and in firm humility while being open to new ways of thinking without rejecting the insights of the past. So I think we're very keen that the debate should occur in a civilised fashion, and that we don't treat each other disrespectfully. And if you want to see examples of that not occurring, just Google ISCAST and Creation Ministries, and you'll find all sorts of unflattering comments, including about me personally also. And we don't want to do that. We want to try and be respectful, but it also means that we don't want people who are like that to be on our platforms. This, I think, is the formal announcement that Graham Clark is our patron. Professor Graham Clark is an otorhinolaryngologist. Oto, ear, rhino, nose, larynx, throat. Ear, nose and throat, although actually he specialises just in the oto, and he specialised in the inner ear of the oto, which is how specialised people become. And of course, we know the journey that he went on, and the biography of Graham Clark is something that Mark Worthing, an ISCAST fellow, has written, and we launched that a couple of years ago in Melbourne, and his biography is well worth reading. If you want to see a person exercising faith in science, that would be Graham Clark's story. He had this dream of the sensory neural deaf people, and even those who were born deaf, hearing again. And he believed that this could be a reality. But his colleagues thought that that was not so. There were attempts to try and get him to be removed as Professor of Otorhinolaryngology at the Royal Victorian Eye and Ear Hospital. He could not get funding for his research. He describes how with a tin he would stand on the corner of Burke Street and Swanson Street and rattle a tin to raise funds for his research programs. He believed that his idea would work. Nobody else believed it. And yet, against the scepticism of his colleagues, he finally discovered how to do it. A wonderful story of playing with a shell on the beach, I think in Kiama or somewhere like that. And he had this blade of grass, and when he played with the shell and the blade of grass actually curled into the shell and fitted there nicely. And he saw then that if he put a probe into the ear, which was shaped like the blade of grass, a tapered shape, that they would automatically follow the curve of the ear. I mean, it's just a wonderful story. So I think he's a very worthy patron to have, and we're very grateful for his support of us and for his greetings. We have, at Tom McLeish's instigation, had two distinguished fellows, Tom McLeish, who whose enthusiasm was absolutely terrific. And he's gone on, whoops. I don't know why it's doing that, technology. So Tom and Cleese is a very great fun. Within an hour of arriving in Melbourne, I said to Tom, who'd come from Britain, and we flew him in business class. He said, look, you've given me a good night's sleep, you squeezed the lemon. So the lemon was squeezed, and he went into all sorts of places, and it was just wonderful. But I said to him, look, why don't you come out to Westerfold Park and to see some kangaroos? And we were standing on the bridge across the Yarra River, and he looked down into the Yarra River there, and he said, this was 9 o'clock in the morning on a Monday morning. Look, he said, there's a platypus. I said, absolutely no way. But there was. There was a... How can that be? And to this day, he does not understand just how privileged he was to see a platypus in the wild. But his enthusiasm has been terrific. I think his faith and wisdom in science is a real game changer in the science-religion debate. Creation is, the theology of creation is much more than just the beginning of, and so on, I could go on. And of course we've met Ken in the conference here, and we're very pleased and proud that you're one of our distinguished fellows, Ken. So since Ken is here and Tom's not, I think we can acknowledge how pleased we are that you're our distinguished fellow.
Tells us what dark matter is.
You know something? In the end, it doesn't matter. This afternoon, on her way back to the other conference, we raced up to Jennifer, because Chris had said, will you speak to her about it? And I said, would you speak to her about it? And between the two of us, we forgot to. There were other things going on. And we asked her, would you be a distinguished fellow? She said, I would be honoured. But I think...
Now you're bringing my name into disrepute. I feel I must interrupt to say, we did send her an email, didn't we?
Oh, no, I didn't. You did.
Well, she was forewarned. It wasn't that we put her on the spot in the car, but quite like that.
No, you're quite right.
And she said she was honoured to receive the email and put it aside because she wanted to respond.
She has a special bit to put those special emails in.
Don't let me interrupt you again.
No, please do. This is wonderful. The point is, we feel honoured, but she feels honoured, and so that's a true ISCASTian position, isn't it? Okay. I want to announce tonight that we've asked Peter Barry to be an honorary fellow. He doesn't know it yet, but I'd like to declare you to be an honorary fellow of ISCAST because of all the great work that you've done for us over many years. Chris, you interrupted again. Peter has been a very faithful member of the board, can always be relied on to check on Richard's minutes, and if Peter Barry passes the minutes, then those minutes are a good and accurate record of what's going on. But his input from New South Wales has been immense over the years, and we're very grateful. And of course he's forged that link between ISCAST and CASE at New College, which has been so productive in terms of the lectures and things that have occurred. The other person is Peter Ayland. I wasn't sure whether to call him professor or not, or whether he's a doctor or not. Peter's a polymath, and if you look up Peter Ayland and see his blogs and websites, he now, listen, this might be something for you who are thinking of retirement to do. He's going to all these different cruises, and provides science, religion type and physics type lectures on cruises, sort of teaching retirees all about these things. Now, that's a great money spinner, so I think that's wonderful that he's doing that, but it doesn't mean he's too busy to be on our board, which is a pity. What are our future plans? One of the things that we see in ISCAST is that there were really just... There's a gremlin here that I have not been able to stop. All right, well, let's lay all the cards on the table and this stuff has been done with it. We have two chapters who we could regard more or less as viable. That is the Melbourne and the Sydney chapters. Other chapters are struggling. But we wonder whether the time has come to restructure ISCAST and to encourage the formation of cells. That is, groups of people who are enthusiastic about the science-religion debate in their own area, and to start quietly and informally with informal reading of papers to each other. Maybe there are a bunch of neuroscientists who want to, or maybe a bunch of dismal scientists like economists who could do that, to do something like that. But in some ways to start the ongoing dialogue that we've talked about earlier, and to then make that part of what their Christian thinking is. Now, I'm aware that many of you, particularly if you're at the cutting edge of your academic, you're very busy. But one of the things that we've observed in ISCAST is that people can be very, very sophisticated in their science, but that their theology can lag quite a way behind. And how do we get that lag to be caught up so that there's an equal discussion between the two? Our future plan is to continue to support the Executive Director, and I think you'll agree that Chris's enthusiasm here has been extremely valuable. How many of you are here as a direct result of Chris's work? There we go, yes, I see, yes, more. All eyes closed, head bowed. Yes, there are more, thank you. The buses, they will wait, sometimes I wait a long time because I've got no battery, but anyway, yeah. So, it has been very exciting to see what Chris is doing, and I think we've got to watch him because he's got a lot of creative energy, and yet at the same time what can then happen is that as he develops his creative energy, we can just sit back and watch and applaud on that sort of stuff, when what we're wanting to try and do is to get some sort of grassroots initiative going. So what we wanted to try and do is to get people to become involved further in what we do. Finance becomes a major consideration. I'll have more to say on that on the next slide. One of the key problems that we have at the moment is communications. While we've got a website, our online journal certainly needs a new editor, and we certainly need people to help with the publishing so that when these cells actually are viable, they can actually produce stuff and there's a direction to go. We have a library which is becoming bigger. Alan Day gave his books to us. I'm not quite sure what to do with them. There is a library at Tabor College with the Graham Clark Institute, and that probably needs to be transferred somewhere. And there will be others who have science religion books who may want to put them somewhere, and if so, where? And there are dialogues in place about that. One of the key challenges to ISCAST is the issue of governance. Your board is becoming thin, and not just their hair, but also their the numbers. We need a board which is renewed, and we also will need to look at administration. I think Stockdale ACS has done a superb job providing administrative support, but they have announced to us that they are retiring at the end of 2019, which means that we're going to have to get a new administrative infrastructure going, and Chris certainly needs an administrator around him if he's to be effective, and I think he'd be the first to say that. This then raises some challenges for ISCAST. The possibility is of alliances going on, and there's a Christian NGO who's just said to us, we're interested in taking ISCAST over and putting us under our Christian umbrella, which in some ways would solve the administrative and governance problem. But what it would do is it would bring the culture of ISCAST into completely a new environment. And I'm not too sure that the culture of ISCAST is going to be preserved if that might happen. Now, if you guys feel very strongly that ISCAST should stand alone, then can you then say, I'd like to be on the board and I'd like to make sure it doesn't. I have administrative skills, I can manage offices, that sort of stuff. That would be very helpful. Trouble is, most of you are bunches of academics who don't know how to do any of that sort of stuff, and that then makes it problematic. We have been gobsmacked at the way in which ISCASTians have supported Chris. and ISCAST generally. You see, last year, at this time, around this time, we had $40,000 raised, and this year, it's $45,000. Now, what you've got to factor in is Tony Morgan's contribution, and Tony has given us $35,000 a year for 3 years. So that also will dry up at the end of 2019, at which case we'll be either turning to the membership and saying we've got to find an extra $35,000 to support Chris for the 3 days a week he's currently working, or even if we find an enthusiastic support that we can say we can employ Chris for even more time. But the surprising and delightful thing was that we actually found that we broke even at the end of 2017. Now, Richard, who tends to be a bit scientific about these things, could not believe that God provides for an organisation like ISCAST, and that God actually being in charge, at least we pray that he is, provided for us so much. And it's actually a sort of a statement of Hudson Taylor's, that if God's work in God's time will not lack resources. And I think we need to continue to be adventurous and to look to God and therefore to the membership for gifts. When I was at Ridley as a secular student, someone said I live by faith, and I said, yes, brother, I live by works to pay for you guys to live by faith. So if those of you who are living by works, if you could send some of your faith to us, that would be great. And let's see how that goes. And that raises the question of bequests, and if you look at page 12 of your handbook, you'll see what Tony Morgan did. Tony was a public servant who had put away quite a bit of money and said, I would like to see this go to Christian ministries and particularly to apologetics. And we took him around, and I think he was quite surprised to meet the sort of people that we have in ISCAST, as we were whenever we come together. We're always in awe of each other. Tony we were just about to sign a memorandum of understanding when he suddenly died in his garden in Canberra on his own and wasn't found for 3 days, which was very sad. But of course it left us in a bit of a pickle because we had already committed ourselves to saying, okay, with $35,000 a year for 3 years, and we put that aside. Thankfully, the Morgan family and the executors came good without needing to go to legal recourse, which the board was not only reluctant to do, but prepared not to do, which upset the president a little bit, but sometimes you've got to do what you're told. However, the Morgan family came good, and that's a very exciting story about God's provision, I think, in that way. It caused us to live by faith, and certainly for a while we had a bit of a cash flow problem. Alan Day has given $10,000 to the ISCAST Victoria for a memorial lecture, which we usually run at Ridley College in Melbourne, and it's a science religion donation. So at this point, people say, well, all of those of you who have not yet made your will, would you please get out your pen and paper and make your will tonight? And ISCAST is spelt I-S-C-A-S-T, and if you'd include that in your will, that would be wonderful. Okay, yes, okay, yeah. 6 emerging streams in the science-faith dialogue. You remember a conference at Ridley College a few years ago where we talked about what the 6 emerging streams are. They're available on the ISCAST website. Stewardship of creation, the use and abuses of technology, neuroscience, evolutionary biology, secularism, new atheism and other worldviews, and scientific literacy in public forums and the pews. And that is, of course, why we had a conference on astronomy. Okay, we're flexible. But what I'm trying to say at this point is, although these are the 6 emerging views that we have, if you find that there's another one that you have a bee in your bonnet about, then please see what you can do. Now, I think one that sort of cuts across this is science education, particularly in schools. And I'll have a bit more to say about that just a little bit later. But the important thing about it all is that we are adopting a missiological and apologetic framework, which means it is the way we do good science which will then develop, which will commend the gospel by the way in which we do our sciences. And I think that that's very important, that we do that with that perspective. Talking about particular interest groups, we talked about school students, and this year I'm pleased to note that Scripture Uni Victoria has run a science camp once again. This is where I, as a high school student, heard John Pilbara give a lecture on cryophysics, the notes of which I still have in my files, and it was the start of a great journey on science and religion. Scripture Union also introduced me to Bernard Ram's The Christian View of Science and Scripture, which preempted a whole lot of stuff in relation to this. Science education in schools, I think, is one of the really hot topics that we need to empower our science educators. Are there science educators here in the classroom? One. Yeah, I know, you're doing a PhD there, another here. Well, you see, that's two, but there are a lot more. And if we can somehow facilitate some way of getting you to do that sort of thing, that would be great. Undergraduates, well, there are many different organisations like AFES that are there, and we can do things there. Scientists starting out are a particularly difficult crowd because they're so busy with their career, but they also need to sort of think about their Christian faith. Established scientists need to think about their vocation, their call to what they're doing for God in the particular area that they're in. And then there's a challenge of serving the general public, both national and international, going from specific issues, from research to policy to outcomes, with all the fraught areas that there are in that. Richard's done quite a bit of discussion on wicked problems, and if you don't know what wicked problems are, search him out and he will tell you how to be wicked. But wicked problems are complex problems covering a multiplicity of government departments and a multiplicity of disciplines, and there's no single answer. It's much more about iteration rather than about saying this is the truth, follow it, and that sort of stuff. Finally, and I know this has been a long time, who knows what... Oh, that wasn't meant to be. Okay, Ela icta est, who said that?
Caesar.
Which Caesar?
Julius Caesar.
Julius Caesar. When did he say it?
Crossing the Rubicon.
When he was crossing the Rubicon, he said, the die is cast. And now I need to go to the right slide here. This is dreadful. It was even on my own computer, which it never did before. From current slide. Okay. And of course, in English, that is, the die is cast. And that, our founding people said, that's why we're called ISCAST. And I remember at a COSAC I'll give it to you. I remember a COSAC in 1999, where I said ISCAST, and ISCAST is the Institute for the Study of Christianity and Age of Science and Technology. A Queenslander invented that term. At which point I remembered there was Laurie Lyon sitting in the audience who had invented the term, so that was my embarrassing moment, one of many. But I was rather excited to find in Polanyi's book, Personal Knowledge, that he had this quote from Johannes Kepler: I have stolen the golden vases of the Egyptians in order to build of them a tabernacle to my God. I shall rejoice. The die is cast. The book is written, whether to be read now or by posterity, I care not. It may wait 100 years for its reader, if God himself has waited 6,000 years for a man to contemplate his work. And so I think ISCAST stands in the tradition of Julius Caesar, Johannes Kepler and other people like that. And I think that ISCAST is Yeah, it's all right. Not a bad name. Prefer to call ourselves Christians in Science and Technology, rather than just Christians in Science, but whatever. What I would like to see is a vibrant organisation which doesn't just have a vision, but has the energy and the commitment and the drive, the courage and the just sheer hard yakka which is required to make this vision a reality. And it will be great to know that you are praying for us as we're doing this, because we believe this is our way of serving our God in a way that creates an integrity between what we do on a Sunday and what we do during the rest of the week. Thank you very much. This is really the end.